The bridge of the Vorthek prison ship had become a scene of controlled chaos as crew members scrambled to respond to the approaching human vessels. General Zikthar arrived to find his officers staring at sensor displays that showed contacts, appearing and disappearing in patterns that made no tactical sense. Captain Vex, the ship's senior officer, turned to greet the general with obvious relief. "Sir, we have been trying to establish communication with the human ships, but their response has been very direct. They demand the immediate release of their captured personnel, and they refuse to discuss any other terms." General Zikthar moved to the command chair and studied the tactical displays himself. The human ships appeared to be using some form of advanced stealth technology that allowed them to mask their exact positions and numbers. Whenever his sensors managed to get a clear reading on one vessel, 2 more contacts would appear incompletely. Different locations. "How many ships are we facing?" the general asked. "Unknown, sir," Captain Vex replied nervously. "Our sensors detect between 6 and 12 vessels, but the readings are inconsistent. The human ships seem to be able to interfere with our scanning systems." A communication alert chimed, and the bridge crew looked to their general for instructions. General Zikthar nodded and activated the main viewing screen to accept the incoming transmission from the human fleet. The screen displayed the interior of what appeared to be a human command center. The technology visible in the background was sleek and efficient, with control surfaces that seemed to respond to touch and gesture commands. Standing in front of the camera was a human female wearing military uniform that bore insignia indicating high rank. The woman appeared to be in her mid-30s with short brown hair and steady gray eyes that reminded General Zikthar uncomfortably of Jake Collins. She carried herself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command authority, and when she spoke her voice was calm, but carried an undertone of barely controlled anger. "I am Captain Lisa Martinez of the Earth Defense Forces," woman said without preamble. "You are holding one of our personnel prisoner aboard your vessel. You will release Dr. Jake Collins immediately and return him to us unharmed." General Zikthar activated his own transmission equipment and responded with what he hoped was proper diplomatic protocol. "I am General Zikthar of the Vorthek Empire. Your ship attacked our forces at Kepler Station, and your personnel was captured. During legitimate military operations, we are prepared to discuss terms for his release through proper negotiation channels." Captain Martinez listened to this response without any change in her expression. When the general finished speaking, she was quiet for several seconds before replying in the same calm tone. "General, you seem to be under the impression that this is a negotiation. It is not. You have 30 minutes to release Dr. Collins and transport him safely to one of our ships. If you fail to comply with this instruction, we will board your vessel and take him back by force." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the Vorthek bridge crew staring at a blank screen. General Zikthar had participated in hundreds of military communications over the years, but he had never encountered anyone who spoke with such absolute certainty about their intentions. "Sir, should we prepare our weapon systems?" Captain Vex asked. General Zikthar considered his options carefully. His ship was heavily armed and carried a crew of over 1,000 trained warriors. The humans appeared to have only a small fleet of vessels with unknown capabilities. But Jake Collins had demonstrated fighting skills that seemed impossible for such a small creature, and his calm confidence about rescue had proved to be completely justified. "Scan those human ships again," the general ordered. "I want to know everything we can determine about their weapons and defensive capabilities." The sensor officer worked frantically at his control station before reporting his findings. "Sir, the human vessels appear to be heavily armed with energy weapons of unknown design. They also seem to have some kind of defensive shielding that our sensors cannot penetrate effectively." Before General Zikthar could respond, new alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. The security officer looked up from his console with obvious panic in his voice. "Sir, we have reports of intruders aboard the ship. Security teams in sections 7 and 12 are not responding to communication attempts." Captain Vex activated the internal communication system and tried to contact the security posts in question. When he received no response, he switched to emergency protocols and began receiving reports from other areas of the ship. "General, security teams throughout the ship are reporting that their colleagues are being found unconscious but uninjured. The intruders appear to be moving through our vessel without triggering any of our detection systems." General Zikthar realized that the humans had not been content to wait 30 minutes for his response, while Captain Martinez had been delivering her ultimatum. Other human personnel had somehow infiltrated his ship and were systematically neutralizing his security forces. "How is this possible?" the general demanded. "Our sensors show no indication of boarding shuttles or transport beams." The answer came from Jake Collins, who was still under guard in the general's command chamber several decks below the bridge. Krell had been monitoring the communication with Captain Martinez and updating the human prisoner about developments. "Your people are very good at fighting enemies that use tactics similar to your own," Jake explained calmly. "But humans learned to fight on a world where the environment itself was always trying to kill us. We developed different approaches to warfare because we had to." Krell looked at the human prisoner with growing concern. "What kind of different approaches?" Jake smiled slightly as more security alarms echoed through the ship. "Stealth, misdirection, psychological warfare, and the ability to turn any environment into a weapon. Your ship was designed to keep prisoners inside and enemies outside, but you never considered opponents who could become invisible and move through spaces that seem impossible to navigate." On the bridge, General Zikthar was receiving increasingly frantic reports from his security teams. The human intruders seemed to be able to appear anywhere on the ship without warning, disable Vorthic personnel with some kind of non-lethal weapons, and disappear again before reinforcements could arrive. "Sir, the humans are definitely moving toward the detention levels," Captain Vex reported. "They appear to know exactly where they are going and how to avoid our security checkpoints." General Zikthar made a decision that he hoped would save his ship and crew from further humiliation. All security teams are ordered to stand down and allow the human intruders to proceed to the detention levels. We will comply with their demands and release their personnel." The bridge crew looked at their general with surprise and disappointment. They had never seen him surrender to any enemy force, regardless of the odds against them. But General Zikthar had realized that he was facing opponents who operated according to completely different rules than any he had encountered before. 20 minutes later, Jake Collins was escorted to the main shuttle bay by a team of human soldiers who had appeared throughout the ship as if materializing from empty air. The rescue team was led by a compact man in advanced combat armor who introduced himself as Lieutenant Ben Rodriguez. "Sorry we took so long, Doc," Rodriguez said as he checked Jake for injuries. "We had to be careful not to hurt any of the locals while we were collecting you." Jake looked around at the Vorthic crew members who had gathered to watch his departure. Many of them seemed stunned by what they had witnessed, unable to understand how a small team of humans had infiltrated their maximum security vessel and neutralized their defenses without killing anyone. "Thank you for the rescue," Jake said to his teammate. "But I think I learned some interesting things during my stay here that our intelligence people should know about." Lieutenant Rodriguez nodded and activated his communication equipment too. "Signal the human ships waiting outside. Captain Martinez, we have the doctor and we are ready for extraction." The locals have been very cooperative once they understood the situation. General Zikthar arrived in the shuttle bay just as the human team was preparing to depart. He approached Jake Collins with obvious reluctance, unsure of what to say to someone who had just demonstrated the futility of opposing human military forces. "Your people are very effective warriors," the general said finally. Jake nodded politely. "They are also very effective at everything else they do. Medicine, engineering, science, exploration, diplomacy when it is appropriate. Fighting is just one of our capabilities, and we prefer to use it only when necessary." The human rescue team boarded their shuttle and departed without any further conversation. General Zekthar watched through the viewing ports as the small craft disappeared into the darkness of space, presumably returning to one of the human ships that his sensors could barely detect. Captain Martinez's voice came over the communication system one final time as the human fleet prepared to leave. "The area. General Zekthar, we are returning to Earth with Dr. Collins and a complete record of everything that occurred during his captivity. Our government will be very interested to learn about the Vorthic Empire and your methods of treating prisoners." 2 hours after the arena fight ended, General Zekthar sat in his private command chamber staring at the preliminary report that his aide had compiled about humans and their home world. The information was sparse and contradictory, but what little data they had was starting to paint a picture that disturbed the general greatly. The chamber was decorated with trophies from his many military victories over the years. Weapons taken from defeated enemies hung on the walls, along with battle standards captured from conquered worlds. A large viewing screen displayed star charts showing the extent of Vorthic territory throughout this section of the galaxy. Krel entered the chamber carrying additional data files and wearing an expression of nervous concern. The young aide had been working frantically to gather every piece of information available about the human species, and what he had found did not match their initial intelligence reports at all. "Sir, I have compiled everything we know about the humans and their planet Earth," Krell said as he approached the general's desk. "The information is limited, but there are some very troubling details that our intelligence division appears to have overlooked." General Zekthar gestured for his aide to continue while he studied the star charts. Earth was located in a relatively small solar system on the outer edge of explored space, far from any major trade routes or strategic resources. It had seemed like an insignificant world populated by primitives when the Vorthic first encountered human ships 6 months ago. "What did our scouts miss?" the general asked without looking up from his charts. Krell activated his datapad and began reading from his compiled report. "Earth is classified as a death world, sir. The gravity is higher than standard. The atmosphere contains reactive gases, and the planet is populated by an enormous variety of predatory life forms that have been competing with each other for millions of years." The general finally looked up from his charts with interest. Death worlds were rare in the galaxy, and species that evolved on them were usually either extinct or extremely dangerous. The fact that humans had not only survived, but developed space travel technology suggested that they possessed capabilities that went far beyond their physical appearance. "Continue," the general ordered. "The human species appears to have evolved as persistence hunters." Krell continued reading. "They track prey over long distances until the target animal collapses from exhaustion. Humans can maintain steady movement for many hours without rest, and they have exceptional endurance compared to most other species." General Zekthar remembered how Jake Collins had moved during the arena fight, never seeming to tire despite constant motion for several minutes. The human had maintained perfect control and awareness throughout the entire battle, while Gorax became increasingly frustrated and sloppy. "What about their technology and military capabilities?" the general asked. Krel consulted another section of his report. "Human technology appears to be roughly equivalent to our own in most areas, but they have some innovations that our engineers do not fully understand. Their ships use unusual propulsion systems, and their weapons incorporate energy types that we have not seen before." The aide paused and looked up from his datapad with obvious concern. Sir, there is something else about humans that seems very important. According to our cultural analysis, they do not abandon their people under any circumstances. When humans are captured or lost, their military forces will always attempt rescue operations, regardless of the cost or difficulty involved. This information sent a chill down General Ziegthar's spine as he realized the implications. If humans never abandoned their people, then Jake Collins would not be forgotten by his species. Somewhere out there, human military forces might already be planning an operation to recover their captured medic. How many humans were on the ship we attacked at Kepler Station? The general asked. According to the battle reports, there were approximately 200 humans aboard the vessel, Krell replied. We captured only one survivor. General Ziegthar stood up and walked to the viewing screen, displaying star charts of the surrounding area. If the humans followed the patterns described in the cultural analysis, then 199 human military personnel had just been given a very strong motivation to attack the Vorthic Empire. Bring the human prisoner to my chamber immediately, the general ordered. I need to question him about his species and their intentions. While Krell left to arrange for Jake's transport, General Ziegthar considered what he had learned about humans so far. They were physically small, but surprisingly capable fighters who had evolved on a world that seemed designed to kill anything that was not perfectly adapted to survive there. They possessed technology that matched Vorthek capabilities, and they never abandoned their own people. 20 minutes later, 2 guards escorted Jake Collins into the command chamber. The human looked calm and alert, despite having fought a major battle earlier that day. His gray medical clothing was clean and undamaged, suggesting that he had been allowed to wash and change after returning from the arena. General Ziegthar dismissed the guards and activated privacy screens that would prevent anyone from overhearing their conversation. He wanted to speak with the human directly, without other crew members learning details that might cause panic or uncertainty among his forces. Sit down, the general said, indicating a chair across from his desk. Jake sat down and looked around the command chamber with obvious interest. His gaze lingered on the various weapons and trophies that decorated the walls before focusing on the star charts displayed on the viewing screen. You fought well today, General Ziegthar said, deciding to begin the conversation with acknowledgement of the human's abilities. Gorax has defeated every opponent he has faced for the past 5 years, but you made him look like an amateur. He is not a bad fighter, Jake replied diplomatically, but his people probably never developed techniques for fighting smaller opponents, because they are all roughly the same size. The general was struck by the analytical nature of the human's response. Jake had not boasted about his victory or expressed satisfaction at defeating a dangerous enemy. Instead, he had given an objective assessment of why the fight had gone as it did. Tell me about your species, the general said. Where do humans come from, and what are your people like? Jake was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much information he should share with his captor. Finally, he began speaking in the same calm tone he had used since his capture. We come from a planet called Earth. It is what you would probably call a death world, where almost everything that lives has evolved to kill and eat everything else. Humans survived by becoming very good at adapting to different situations and working together to solve problems. General Ziegthar leaned forward with interest. And your military forces, what are they like? Professional, Jake answered simply. We learned a long time ago that wars are too dangerous to leave to amateurs. Our soldiers train constantly, and they use every advantage they can find to protect human lives and complete their missions. The general found the human's calm confidence disturbing. Jake spoke about his species' military capabilities as if he were discussing the weather, with no hint of boasting or intimidation. It was the tone of someone stating obvious facts that everyone should already know. I am told that humans never abandon their people, the general said. Is this true? Yes, Jake replied without hesitation. No one gets left behind. It is one of our most important principles. General Zeke Thar felt his concern growing as the human confirmed the information. In Krell's report, so your people will attempt to rescue you from this ship. Jake looked directly into the general's yellow eyes and smiled slightly. They are probably already on their way. The quiet certainty in the human's voice made General Zeke Thar's blood run cold. This was not false bravado or desperate hope. Jake. Colin spoke as if the rescue of one captured medic was a foregone conclusion that required no discussion. You seem very confident for someone who is completely helpless, the general observed. I am not helpless, Jake corrected gently. I am temporarily inconvenienced. There is a difference. Before the general could respond to this statement, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Emergency lights flashed red in the command chamber. As Krell's voice came over the communication system with obvious panic, General Zeke Thar to the bridge immediately. We have multiple contacts approaching our position at high speed. Unknown ships are requesting that we surrender and release all prisoners. General Zeke Thar looked at Jake, who was sitting calmly in his chair, as if he had been expecting this development. The human's slight smile had grown wider, but there was nothing mocking or cruel about his expression. He looked like someone who was genuinely pleased that his friends had arrived to help him. How is this possible? The general demanded. We are deep in Vorthic territory, hundreds of light years from any human worlds. Jake shrugged casually. Distance is not really a problem when someone needs help. My people are very good at traveling quickly when necessary. The alarms continued to sound as more reports came in from the bridge. The unknown ships were now close enough for detailed scans, and what the sensors were detecting made no sense according to Vorthic understanding of space combat tactics. Sir, Krell's voice crackled over the communication cyst. The silence in the arena stretched for several long seconds as both fighters faced each other across the polished metal floor. Gorax wiped a small amount of fluid from where he had scraped his arm during the fall, and for the first time in years, he felt uncertain about the outcome of a fight. The human had moved with a precision that seemed impossible for such a small creature. Jake Collins remained in his ready position, balanced on the balls of his feet with his hands relaxed at his sides. His breathing was steady and controlled, showing no signs of exhaustion, despite having evaded Gorax's attacks for several minutes. The human's brown eyes never left the Kronit's face, watching for any sign of the next attack. General Zeke Thar leaned forward in his viewing chair, his amusement beginning to turn into concern. This was not going according to his expectations at all. The pathetic human doctor should have been dead within seconds of the fight beginning, but instead, he had managed to knock down the arena's most successful gladiator. What kind of species is this human from? The general muttered to his aide. How does such a weak-looking creature move like that? Krell consulted his data pad frantically, looking for any additional information about humans that might explain what they were witnessing. The initial reports just say they come from a planet called Earth, sir. Our intelligence division classified them as a minor threat based on their physical appearance. Well, they clearly got something wrong, the general snapped. Minor threats do not embarrass chronic gladiators in single combat. Down in the arena, Gorax had recovered from his surprise and was preparing for a more careful approach. The chronic began circling Jake slowly, using his forearms to create multiple angles of attack. He had learned not to underestimate this opponent's ability to avoid his grasp. Jake matched Gorax's movement, maintaining the distance between them while continuing to study the Kronit's patterns. The human had noticed several things about his opponent during their initial exchange. Gorax was incredibly strong and tough, but he was also predictable in his attack methods. The Chronet relied on his size and power to overwhelm opponents, which meant he had never developed sophisticated fighting techniques. More importantly, Jake had identified several potential weak points in Gorax's anatomy. The joints where his forearms connected to his torso showed slight differences in the thickness of his hide. The area just below his massive jaw appeared to have less natural armor than the rest of his head. These observations were the result of training that Jake had received back on Earth. The crowd in the viewing galleries had started cheering again, but their enthusiasm was mixed with confusion and nervous energy. They had come to watch a quick execution, not a genuine contest between two skilled fighters. Some of the Vorthic crew members were beginning to reconsider their bets about the outcome. Gorax decided to try a different approach and feinted with his upper arms while attacking with his lower ones. It was a move that had worked against many previous opponents who focused too much attention on his more visible limbs. But Jake read the deception immediately and shifted position to avoid both the feint and the real attack dot as Gorax's lower. Arms swept through the space where Jake had been standing. The human stepped inside the Chronet's reach and delivered a precise strike to a nerve cluster just below Gorax's left shoulder. The blow looked almost gentle compared to the powerful attacks the Chronet had been throwing, but it caused Gorax's entire left arm to go numb instantly. The Chronet roared in pain and surprise as he lost control of one of his primary weapons. He had never experienced anything like the strange tingling sensation that spread from where the human had touched him. Gorax tried to move his left arm and found that it responded slowly and weakly, as if he were fighting through thick liquid. Jake moved away again before Gorax could respond with his remaining arms. The human's expression remained calm and focused, but there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. It was the look of a professional at work, someone who knew exactly what he was doing and how to do it efficiently. Impossible. General Zikthar breathed as he watched Gorax struggle with his disabled arm. No creature that small should be able to damage a Chronet warrior. The general's aide was frantically taking notes about everything they were observing. "Sir, should we stop the fight and study this human more carefully before we execute him?" "Absolutely not," the general replied sharply. "I want to see what else this creature can do. Order Gorax to continue fighting." The message was transmitted to speakers in the arena, and Gorax heard his orders clearly. The Chronet was now fighting with only 3 functional arms, but he was still much larger and stronger than his human opponent. He adjusted his stance to compensate for the loss of his left arm and prepared to attack again. This time Gorax moved more cautiously, keeping his remaining arms positioned to defend against the human's strange, precise strikes. But Jake had already identified his next target and was maneuvering to reach it. The human's movements were becoming more fluid and aggressive as he adapted to his opponent's capabilities. When Gorax attempted another grabbing attack, Jake ducked under the reaching arms and struck the Chronet's right knee with his elbow. Again, the blow appeared almost casual, but it hit exactly the right spot to disrupt the nerve signals controlling Gorax's leg muscles. The massive Chronet stumbled and nearly fell as his right leg buckled beneath him. The crowd was now completely silent, except for scattered gasps of disbelief. They were watching something that should have been impossible, according to everything. They knew about combat between different species. A tiny human was systematically dismantling a gladiator who had killed dozens of opponents over the years. Gorax was beginning to understand that he was facing something completely outside his experience. This was not just a lucky, weak creature that had managed to avoid getting caught. The human was a trained fighter who knew exactly how to exploit weaknesses that Gorax did not even know he had. "You are not just a medic," Gorax said in his rumbling voice as he struggled to maintain his balance on his damaged leg. Jake looked up at the towering Chronet and spoke quietly. "I am a medic. But where I come from, medics learn to fight because our job is to keep people alive in places where everything is trying to kill them. The human's words sent a chill through General Zekthar as he began to realize the implications. If this creature was just a doctor from the human species, what would their actual soldiers be capable of doing? Gorax made one final desperate attack, throwing all of his remaining strength into a charge that he hoped would at least allow him to grab the human and crush him. But Jake was ready for this move and had positioned himself perfectly to counter it. As the chronic rushed forward, Jake stepped to the side and used Gorax's own momentum against him. The human grabbed the chronet's right arm and applied leverage. That sent the massive fighter flying across the arena floor. Gorax landed hard and slid several feet before coming to a stop against the energy barrier that surrounded the combat area. When Gorax tried to get up, he found that his body was no longer responding properly to his commands. The human's precise strikes had damaged nerve pathways that controlled his major muscle groups. The chronet could barely move his arms and legs, much less continue fighting. Jake walked over to where Gorax lay struggling to rise and knelt down beside him. Instead of delivering a finishing blow, the human began examining the chronet's injuries with professional medical concern. "You have some nerve damage that should heal in a few hours," Jake said as he gently probed Gorax's shoulder and knee. "Try not to move too much, and the feeling will come back gradually." The crowd in the viewing galleries was completely stunned. They had just watched a human medic defeat their champion gladiator, and now he was treating the chronet's injuries instead of claiming victory. This behavior made no sense according to any warrior culture they knew about. General Zekthar stood up in his viewing box, his mind racing as he tried to process what he had witnessed. The small human had not just won the fight through luck or trickery. He had demonstrated fighting skills that seemed to be specifically designed for defeating much larger and stronger opponents. "Get me everything we know about the human species," the general ordered his aide. "I want to know what planet they come from, what their military capabilities are, and why our intelligence reports said they were not a threat." Krell was already working on his datapad, sending urgent requests to the ship's information systems. "Sir, I am pulling all available data about humans and their homeworld. It may take some time to compile a complete report." In the arena, Jake helped Gorax into a sitting position and continued his medical examination. The chronet looked at his former opponent with a mixture of respect and confusion. "Why do you help me after defeating me?" Gorax asked. "In arena combat, the winner usually kills the loser." Jake shrugged as he checked the circulation in Gorax's damaged arm. "You are injured, and I am a doctor. Taking care of hurt people is what I do." The simple honesty in the human's voice was somehow more unsettling to the watching Vorthik than his fighting abilities had been. This creature combined deadly combat skills with genuine compassion, a combination that seemed impossible to their way of thinking. The next morning brought excitement throughout the Vorthik prison ship as word spread about the general's announcement. All prisoners would participate in combat trials before their scheduled executions. The trials would take place in the ship's arena, a large circular chamber that the Vorthek used for entertainment and training exercises. General Zekthar had decided that watching his prisoners fight each other would provide excellent amusement for his crew. The arena was located in the center of the ship, with viewing galleries that could hold several hundred spectators. The fighting floor was made of polished metal that reflected the bright lights hanging from the ceiling. Energy barriers surrounded the combat area to protect the audience from any weapons or projectiles that might fly in their direction during the fights. General Zekthar sat in his private viewing box high above the arena floor. His chair was carved from the bone of some massive creature he had killed years ago, and it was positioned to give him the best view of the combat below. Today he wore his battle armor instead of ceremonial dress, as he wanted to look intimidating. For his prisoners who would soon be fighting for his entertainment, the crew members who had gathered to watch the fights filled the galleries with excited chatter. They pointed at the prisoners being led into holding areas beneath the arena and made bets on which ones would survive the longest. Most of the Vorthik had never seen warriors from other species fight each other, so this promised to be an interesting spectacle. Jake Collins was brought into the preparation area along with the other prisoners. The holding cells underneath the arena were even smaller than their regular prison cells, barely large enough for one person to stand upright. Guards armed with energy weapons watched them carefully to prevent any escape attempts or violence. Before the scheduled fights began, the human looked around at his fellow prisoners and noticed that most of them appeared nervous or angry about the coming trials. The Kroger warrior was pacing back and forth in his tiny cell like a caged animal. The Sileni scout sat perfectly still, but her large eyes darted constantly between the guards and the exits. The Centauri tech specialist stared at his hands as if he were trying to calculate the odds of survival. An announcement echoed through the preparation area as General Zeke Thar's voice boomed from speakers mounted on the walls. Prisoners of the Vorthik Empire, today you will have the honor of entertaining my crew with demonstrations of your combat abilities. Those who fight well may earn the privilege of a quick death. Those who disappoint me will suffer greatly before they die. The general continued his announcement with obvious pleasure in his voice. The first match will feature our newest prisoner, the pathetic human creature that calls itself Jake Collins. He will face Gorax the Destroyer, champion gladiator of the Kronit species. This should provide us with a brief but amusing warm-up for the more serious battles to follow. Jake heard his name and looked up toward the speakers with the same calm expression he had maintained since his capture. Several other prisoners turned to stare at him with mixtures of pity and disbelief. They all knew that being selected for the first fight was usually a death sentence, especially when facing someone called the Destroyer. A guard approached Jake's cell and activated the door mechanism. "Human, you fight now," the guard said in broken galactic common. "Move to preparation chamber." Jake stood up and walked calmly out of his cell, following the guard through a narrow corridor toward the arena entrance. Behind him, he could hear other prisoners whispering among themselves about his chances of survival. Most seemed to think the fight would be over in seconds. The preparation chamber was a small room where fighters could check their equipment and receive any weapons they might be allowed to use. Jake found that he had been given nothing except the simple gray clothing he had worn since his capture. No armor, no weapons, no protective gear of any kind. A different guard entered the room, carrying a datapad with information about the upcoming fight. "Human prisoner Jake Collins," the guard read aloud. "You will face Kronit gladiator Gorax in single combat. No weapons permitted. Fight continues until one fighter cannot continue. Do you understand these rules?" "I understand," Jake replied. Quietly, the guard looked at him with what might have been sympathy. "Gorax has killed 43 opponents in arena combat. He shows no mercy to weak fighters. You should try to die quickly and save yourself pain." Jake nodded politely. "Thank you for the advice." Meanwhile, in another preparation chamber, Gorax the Destroyer was making final preparations for his fight. The massive Kronit stood over 7 feet tall and weighed at least 400 pounds. His people had evolved on a high-gravity world where only the strongest could survive, and Gorax represented the peak of Kronit physical development. His body was covered in thick gray hide that could turn aside most bladed weapons. 4 powerful arms extended from his torso, each one capable of lifting several hundred pounds. His face was dominated by a huge jaw filled with teeth designed for crushing bones. Scars covered his body from previous battles, and each scar represented a defeated enemy Gorax had been captured during the Kronet Rebellion 5 years ago. Since then he had been forced to fight in arenas across the Vorthic Empire, always winning, always surviving. The Vorthic kept him alive because he provided excellent entertainment and helped break the spirits of other prisoners who had to watch him destroy their fellow captives. A guard brought Gorax information about his opponent for today's fight. When the Kronet learned that he would be facing a human medic, he laughed so hard that the walls of his preparation chamber shook. He had never heard of humans before, but any species that sent doctors to fight wars must be incredibly weak. This will not even be good exercise, Gorax said to himself in his deep rumbling voice. I will try to make it last more than 10 seconds, so the crowd does not feel cheated. The arena doors opened, and Jake Collins walked out onto the polished metal floor. The bright lights made him squint for a moment as his eyes adjusted to the glare. The noise from the viewing galleries was tremendous, with hundreds of Vorthic crew members cheering and shouting bets about how quickly the human would die. General Sekthar leaned forward in his ornate chair, eager to see the weak human get torn apart by the Kronet champion. He had specifically chosen this matchup because he wanted to demonstrate the futility of opposing the Vorthic Empire. Watching the pathetic human doctor get destroyed would send a clear message to the other prisoners about their own fates. The arena doors on the opposite side opened and Gorax emerged with ground-shaking footsteps. The crowd's cheering grew even louder as they saw their favorite gladiator enter the combat area. Gorax raised all 4 arms above his head and roared his challenge, a sound so deep and powerful that it seemed to vibrate through the metal floor. Jake looked across the arena at his opponent and took a moment to study Gorax's movement patterns and physical capabilities. The Kronet was obviously built for raw power and intimidation. His 4 arms would give him significant advantages in grappling situations, and his thick hide would protect him from most conventional attacks. The size difference between the 2 fighters was dramatic. Gorax towered over Jake by more than 2 feet and probably outweighed him by 300 pounds. From the viewing galleries, it looked like a giant preparing to step on an insect. Look at them, General Sekthar said to his aide with amusement. The human barely comes up to the Kronet's chest. This is going to be the shortest fight in arena history. Krell nodded nervously while watching the 2 fighters face each other. Should we start timing how long the human survives, sir? Why bother? The general replied. I doubt it will be long enough to measure. A horn sounded to signal the beginning of combat. Gorax immediately began walking toward Jake with confident, measured steps. He was in no hurry because he knew his opponent had nowhere to run and no way to hurt him. The Kronet planned to grab the human with 2 arms and use his other 2 arms to tear him apart slowly for the entertainment of the crowd. Jake remained still until Gorax was almost close enough to reach him. Then he began moving in a way that surprised everyone watching. Instead of backing away or cowering in fear, the human started circling his opponent with smooth, controlled steps. His movements were precise and economical, wasting no energy on unnecessary motion. Gorax reached out with his massive arms to grab the small human, but Jake was no longer where the Kronet expected him to be. The human had shifted position at exactly the right moment to avoid the grasping hands. This surprised Gorax, because most opponents either charged at him recklessly or froze in terror. When he approached them, the crowd started to murmur with confusion as they watched the human continue to evade Gorax's attacks. Every time the Kronet tried to grab him, Jake moved just enough to stay out of reach. The human never seemed to be in a hurry, but somehow he was always in a different place when Gorax's hands closed on empty air. What is that creature doing? General Sekthar demanded as he watched Jake slip away from another grabbing attempt. Why does it not fight back or surrender? This pattern continued for several minutes, with Gorax becoming increasingly frustrated as he failed to catch his elusive opponent. The metal corridors of the Vorthic prison ship echoed with the heavy footsteps of General Zikthar as he made his way through the detention block. The massive reptilian commander stood nearly 8 feet tall, his dark green scales scarred from countless battles across the galaxy. His yellow eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction as he walked past row after row of prison cells, each one holding warriors from different species that had dared to oppose the mighty Vorthic Empire. General Zikthar loved this part of his day. Every morning he would walk through the prison levels to look at his collection of defeated enemies. It reminded him of his own power and the strength of his people. The cells were designed to break the spirit of even the strongest warriors. With dim lighting and barely enough space to stand upright, the prisoners received just enough food and water to keep them alive for their eventual execution. Today the general wore his finest ceremonial armor, polished black metal decorated with the skulls of his fallen enemies. His aide, a nervous young Vorthic named Krell, followed behind him carrying a datapad that listed information about each prisoner. Krell always stayed several steps back because he knew the general's temper could explode without warning. The first cell held a Kroger warrior, one of the bull-like creatures from the outer rim planets. The Kroger had thick gray skin and massive horns that could pierce through steel plating. When the general stopped in front of his cell, the prisoner stood up and glared at him with red eyes full of hate. The Kroger was still proud despite being captured 3 months ago. "Look at this one," General Zikthar said to his aide with a laugh. "Still thinks he can intimidate me with those angry looks. Tell me, Krell, how long before we execute this beast?" Krell looked at his data pad nervously. "According to the schedule, sir, he will be executed next week during the victory celebration on Vorthic Prime." The general nodded with approval. "Good. The crowds will enjoy watching him die. These Kroger think they are so tough with their thick skin and big horns, but they break just like all the others." They moved on to the next cell, which contained a Silene scout. The Silene were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible speed and agility. This one was a female with blue skin and long silver hair. She sat in the corner of her cell, with her knees pulled up to her chest. Her large eyes followed the general as he walked past, but she did not move or speak. "This one used to run faster than most ships could fly," the general said with amusement. "Now look at her, sitting there like a scared child. The mighty Silene are not so fast when they are locked in a cage." The next several cells held warriors from various other species. There was a Thrakari hunter with his deadly claws filed down to prevent him from harming himself or others. A Zentari tech specialist who had tried to hack into Vorthic military systems sat staring at the wall with empty eyes. 2 Mordian brothers who had fought side by side for 20 years now barely looked at each other. General Zikthar took great pleasure in describing how each species had been defeated by the superior tactics and technology of the Vorthic Empire. He explained to Krell how the Thrakari relied too much on their natural weapons and could not adapt when faced with energy shields. The Zentari thought their technology made them untouchable until Vorthic virus bombs destroyed their computer networks. The Mordians were brave fighters, but they were too honorable and predictable in battle. As they reached the end of the corridor, the general expected to find the final cell empty as usual. But today there was a prisoner inside that he had never seen before. The creature was small and pale, sitting quietly in the back corner of the cell. It looked up when the general approached, and he found himself staring into brown eyes that seemed oddly calm for a prisoner. "What is this thing?" General Zikthar asked his aide. "When did we capture such a pathetic-looking creature?" Krell consulted his datapad and frowned. "According to the records, sir, this prisoner was brought in yesterday from the battle at Kepler Station. His name is Jake Collins, and he belongs to a species called humans. The general looked more closely at the human. Jake Collins appeared to be one of the weakest beings he had ever seen. The creature had no natural armor, no claws or fangs, no obvious weapons of any kind. His skin looked soft and easily damaged. His limbs were thin and appeared to lack the muscle mass needed for serious combat. The human wore simple gray clothing that looked more like medical scrubs than military gear. Humans, the general repeated the word slowly. I have never heard of this species before. Are you certain this thing is actually a warrior? The report says he was found in the medical bay of the human ship, Krell explained. Apparently, he was treating wounded soldiers when our forces boarded the vessel. General Zekthar burst into loud laughter that echoed through the detention block. Several other prisoners looked up from their cells to see what was so amusing. The general had to lean against the wall to support himself as he continued laughing. A medic, he wheezed between laughs. They put a medic in my maximum security prison. Look at this creature, Krell. It probably weighs less than my left arm. I could snap its neck with my thumb and finger. Jake Collins remained sitting calmly in his corner, watching the general's display with those same steady brown eyes. He did not seem frightened or angry, just quietly observant. This only made the general laugh harder. Tell me, little creature, the general said, pressing his face close to the energy bars of the cell. What kind of weak species sends their doctors to fight wars? Did your people run out of real soldiers? The human finally spoke, his voice quiet, but clear. I volunteer to serve where I am needed. His accent was strange to the general's ears, but the words were spoken in perfect galactic common. There was no fear in his voice, no pleading or anger. He spoke as if he were having a normal conversation. Where you are needed, the general repeated mockingly. And where exactly did your people think they needed you? In a battle against the Vorthic Empire, perhaps. I go where my patients are, Jake replied simply. Soldiers get hurt in battles. Someone needs to take care of them. General Zekthar shook his head in disbelief. Your species must be incredibly stupid to send healers into combat zones. No wonder we destroyed your ship so easily. The general turned to address the other prisoners in nearby cells. Look at what the galaxy sends against us now. Not warriors or hunters or soldiers, but doctors. This pathetic creature probably faints at the sight of blood. Some of the other prisoners glanced over at the human with expressions of pity or confusion. They were all hardened fighters who had earned their places in this prison through years of combat. None of them could understand how someone who looked so weak and defenseless had ended up among them. The Kroger warriors snorted with contempt. That thing would not last 5 minutes in a real fight. Why do the Vorthic even bother keeping it alive? Entertainment, General Zekthar answered with a cruel smile. I think our little human doctor will provide us with some amusement before his execution. Perhaps we will let him try to heal himself after we break a few of his bones. Jake Collins listened to this conversation without changing expression. He continued to sit quietly in his corner, occasionally looking around at the other prisoners, but never showing any sign of fear or despair. His calm behavior was starting to irritate the general, who expected his prisoners to show proper respect for their captors. You seem very relaxed for someone who is about to die, the general observed. Do you not understand your situation, little human? I understand it perfectly, Jake replied. You captured me, brought me to your ship, and now you plan to kill me. That part is pretty clear. The general was surprised by this response. Most prisoners either begged for mercy or made threats they could not carry out. This human seemed to accept his fate with unusual calmness. Then why are you not afraid? The general demanded. Why do you sit there like you are waiting for transport to your vacation? Jake was quiet for a moment before answering. Fear does not help anyone in a situation like this. If I am going to die, I prefer to do it with dignity. General Zikthar stared at the small human for several long seconds. There was something about this creature that bothered him, though he could not identify what it was. The human's calm acceptance of his fate was not what the general expected from such a weak-looking being. "We shall see how dignified you remain when the real fun begins," the general said finally. "Tomorrow you will learn what happens to those who oppose the Vorthic Empire." As General Zikthar and his aide walked away from the detention block, the general continued to think about the strange human prisoner. Something about Jake Collins did not fit with what he knew about weak species. Most creatures that looked so defenseless were also cowardly and desperate. But this human showed neither fear nor false bravado. He simply existed in his cell with quiet confidence that made no sense given his obvious physical limitations. The general decided that tomorrow he would find a special way to break this unusual prisoner's spirit before executing him.